My wife said I was too old to live alone, so she signed the papers. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a care home lounge that smelled like overcooked peas and carpet cleaner. My granddaughter started visiting every single day. Then one afternoon she leaned close and whispered something that made my stomach go cold. She said she had photographed something inside her mother's purse, and she was getting me out. Now, before I get ahead of myself, because I do that sometimes when a memory still sits too close to the front of your head, I should probably explain how a man who could still drive his own pickup ended up being too old to live alone. Name's Mickle. Most folks around here just say Uncle Mickle, even if we're not related. Been that way for years. I'm not actually an uncle to half the people who call me that. Just stuck. Anyway, the day my wife told me I needed help was a Tuesday. Or hold on, it might have been Wednesday. I remember the trash bins were out by the curb, and our street does pick up Wednesday mornings. So yeah, Wednesday. Pretty sure. Cold morning. Frost still clinging to the mailbox posts along the road. Our kitchen window fogged up from the coffee pot. I was sitting at the table with my old flannel on, the red one with the frayed cuffs, reading the paper the way I always did, front page first, sports last. Routine. That's when she came in with a folder. Not a regular folder either. One of those stiff blue ones with tabs sticking out the side. Paper smell. She set it down next to my coffee mug, like she was placing a plate on the table. Gentle. Too gentle. And that's the first moment something felt off. Because my wife, Carol, wasn't the gentle paperwork type. She was more the say it plain and move on kind of person. Always had been. 40 years married. You learn those rhythms. But that morning she didn't sit down right away. She stood near the counter, hands folded, watching me read. Which, I noticed. I just didn't say anything yet. Sometimes when a person wants to talk, silence pulls it out faster than questions. So I kept reading. Or pretending to. The sports section headline was about college football rankings. Alabama, I think. No, wait. Might have been Georgia that week. Doesn't matter much now. The letters looked fuzzy anyway. Not because of my eyes. Because I could feel her standing there. Finally she said it. Mickle, we need to talk about your living situation. Now, when your own wife calls the house you've lived in for 30 years, your living situation, that lands strange. Real strange. I set the paper down slow. The heater clicked on behind us in the hallway vent. Low hum. What about it? I asked. And that's when she slid the folder across the table. Just pushed it toward me. No drama. Inside were forms. Medical evaluations. Care recommendations. Facility brochures. A place about 20 minutes outside town. Sunnybrook Senior Living. Nice name. The kind of name that tries real hard to sound peaceful. I flipped through the pages. Didn't rush. Didn't ask yet. Then I noticed something. Signatures. Doctor's office letterhead. Dates. A lot of dates. Most of them from appointments I didn't remember going to. And that's when I looked back up at Carol. She was watching my hands. Not my face. My hands. People do that when they're waiting to see how steady someone is. Or maybe how shaky. I'm not sure what she expected. For a minute neither of us spoke. Then she said the sentence that still rattles around in my head some nights. Mickle, you shouldn't be living alone anymore. Now that part didn't make sense right away. Because I wasn't living alone. She was standing right there. Kitchen floor tiles cold under my boots. Coffee still steaming. House exactly the same as it had been yesterday. So I asked her, since when am I alone? She hesitated. Just long enough. And in that little pause, something inside me started to shift. Not anger. Not yet. Just awareness. Like when you're driving and the road suddenly goes quiet because the radio cut out. You notice. Then she said it. She told me she had already made arrangements. That Sunnybrook place had a room ready. That it would be temporary. Just until I got stronger. Stronger from what? I never quite understood. I remember flipping another page in the folder. There was a care plan printed out. Medication schedules. Supervision notes. Supervision. That word stuck out. I actually laughed a little then. Couldn't help it. Short laugh. Because 3 days earlier I had rebuilt the carburetor on my truck in the driveway. Hands covered in grease. Engine running smooth after. Not exactly supervision territory, but Carol didn't laugh. She stayed standing there, waiting. And the odd thing is, looking back now, I don't remember feeling scared in that moment. Just puzzled, like someone had skipped a chapter in the story and handed me the next page. I asked a couple questions. She answered them quick. Too quick maybe. But at the time I didn't push hard. Probably should have. Hard to say now. Memory gets tricky like that. Anyway, 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a padded chair in the Sunnybrook Common Room, watching afternoon TV with people who slept through half the programs. My granddaughter Emma started visiting every day. Every single day. And one afternoon she leaned close and whispered something that changed the direction of everything. Something about her mother's purse. A photograph. Proof. And the quiet little promise that she was getting me out of there. Sunnybrook wasn't a bad place. That's the honest truth. People here care home, and picture peeling paint and nurses rushing around with clipboards. This place wasn't like that. The floors were polished. The lights stayed bright. Someone always had a tray of coffee sitting near the lounge windows. Still smelled like peas though. Boiled vegetables have a way of getting into the walls of a place. I moved into room 214. Second floor. End of the hallway. A window that looked over a parking lot, and a row of pine trees that leaned a little sideways when the wind came across the highway. They gave me a bed, a dresser, a chair, and a little TV mounted high in the corner like a motel. Functional. That's the word they like to use. Functional living space. The first few days I kept thinking it was temporary. Carol said it would be. And after 40 years of marriage, you don't exactly assume your wife is, well, repositioning your life without reason. You trust. Or at least you start there. I unpack my things slow. A couple flannel shirts. My shaving kit. The old photo of Emma at 6 years old holding a blue ribbon from the county fair goat show. That picture stayed on the dresser, right beside the little lamp. Funny thing about that lamp, hold on. I almost said it had a green shade, but that's not right. It was beige. Plain fabric shade. The green one was in our bedroom back home. Memory does that sometimes. Slides one object on top of another. Anyway, the staff were polite, not overly chatty, which I appreciated. A nurse named Carla handled my intake paperwork the first afternoon. She had a pen clipped behind her ear and a way of talking that sounded half professional, half tired. She asked the usual questions. Medical history, medications, balance issues. I told her I took blood pressure pills and that my balance was fine unless someone shoved me. She chuckled at that. Wrote something down. I noticed she didn't argue. Most mornings started quiet. Breakfast at 7. Oatmeal. Toast. Sometimes scrambled eggs if the kitchen was feeling ambitious. Then people scattered to their routines. Some watched TV. Some played cards. Some just sat near the windows like cats in sunlight. I tried the walking path behind the building a few times. Gravel trail. About a quarter-mile loop. Cold air most mornings. Pine smell. Truck noise from the highway drifting over the trees. I kept thinking, this doesn't feel like somewhere you recover strength. It feels like somewhere people wait. Not in a sad way exactly. Just waiting. Days moving at half speed. Emma started coming the second day. That surprised me. School bus dropped her off 2 streets away, and she'd walk the rest. Backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Dark hair always pulled back into a ponytail that loosened by the time she reached the door. She was 13 then. Or maybe 14, no. 13. Her birthday was still a few weeks away in the spring. I remember because she talked about getting her learner's permit someday. 13. Still young enough to run. First time she came in, she looked around the lobby like she was inspecting a hotel. Eyes sharp. Kids noticed details adults walked past. She plopped into the chair beside mine like it was normal. No awkwardness. Just said, "Hey, Grandpa." Simple. Those visits became routine fast. School days she'd show up around 4. Weekends sometimes earlier. We'd sit near the big front window where the sun came through the glass in the afternoon. The chairs there were warmer than the rest of the lounge. She'd tell me about school. Teachers she liked. Teachers she didn't. One science project involving baking soda that apparently exploded across a classroom desk. Kids laugh when they tell stories like that. Real laughter. Not the polite kind adults do. Sometimes we'd walk outside along the parking lot edge. She liked looking at the different license plates. Said it was like a game, guessing where people came from. Arizona, Colorado, Utah, places far enough away to feel interesting. Now here's the thing. Emma never once asked why I was there. Not the first week. Not the second. And that stuck with me. Most kids would ask right away, "Why can't you come home? Are you sick?" Something like that. But Emma just visited, talked, listened, like she was gathering pieces of something. I remember one afternoon we were sitting near the window, and she asked me a question that didn't sound casual at all. She said, "Grandpa, do you feel different lately?" Different. That word. I leaned back in the chair and thought about it for a minute. The heater was blowing warm air across the carpet. Someone down the hall was watching a game show. The sound of applause leaking through the doorway. Did I feel different? Honestly, no, not really. Same hands, same thoughts, same urge to get back to my garage and finish tuning the truck engine. So I told her, "Nope." She nodded slowly. Didn't argue. But I noticed she stared at the medication cart when the nurse rolled it past. Long look, and something about that moment planted a small question in the back of my head. Nothing big, just a little scratch. Because the truth is, I had been taking the pills they gave me every night without asking much about them. Small white tablets. 2 of them. Carol had mentioned medication adjustments before I moved in. Said the doctor recommended it. I didn't think much of it then. Probably should have. Hard to say. But sitting there beside Emma that afternoon, watching her watch that medication cart, a thought crossed my mind. Not a conclusion, just a question. One I hadn't asked yet, and maybe you wouldn't either. If the person who made the decision for you was someone you trusted for 40 years, think about that for a second. If someone you built a life with tells you something is necessary, how long would it take before you start wondering if it isn't? Because I didn't start wondering right away. Not seriously. Not until the day Emma leaned close in her chair and whispered something about a photograph she'd taken, something inside her mother's purse, and the look on her face when she said it. That was the moment the quiet little scratch in my mind turned into a real question, a heavier one, and questions like that don't sit still for long. The whisper came on a Thursday. I'm fairly sure it was Thursday. They served baked chicken at lunch that day, and that only showed up once a week. Unless they changed the menu and I missed it. Could be that too. Anyway, Emma came in like she always did, backpack, loose ponytail, cheeks pink from the cold outside. She waved to the receptionist, walked straight to the lounge, and dropped into the chair beside mine. Routine. But she didn't start talking right away. That was new. Usually she launched into a story before she even sat down fully. Something about school or friends or a teacher saying something ridiculous. This time she sat still, hands folded around the straps of her backpack, watching the floor. Quiet kid quiet is different than regular quiet. Hard to explain. It carries weight. I let it sit for a moment. The TV in the corner was playing some home renovation show. A hammer tapping somewhere through the speakers. Finally I asked, "Everything all right?" She nodded, then shook her head, then leaned closer in her chair like someone checking if the room had ears. "Grandpa," she said, barely above a whisper, "I found something." Now, when a 13-year-old says that, your first thought is usually something small. A lost key, a school note, a funny picture on someone's phone. Not this. She unzipped her backpack slowly and slid out her phone. Screen already open. Camera roll. She held it low between us so nobody across the room could see. "Mom left her purse on the kitchen counter yesterday," she said. Another quick glance around the lounge. "I wasn't snooping," she added fast. Then paused. "Okay, maybe a little." Kids admit things halfway like that. Honest but not comfortable. On the phone screen was a photograph. Not a regular snapshot either. It looked like she had opened something, a wallet or folder maybe, and snapped the picture quick before putting it back. The image showed papers. Several sheets stacked together. Printed forms. And right there near the top of one page was my name. Full name. Mickle Andrew Lawson. Black letters against white paper. I felt that little scratch in my mind again. Bigger now. "What am I looking at?" I asked. She zoomed in on the picture, fingers sliding across the glass. There were medical notes. diagnosis boxes, medication schedules, doctor signatures. One of the forms had a bold title across the top: Cognitive Impairment Evaluation. That phrase sat there like a brick. Now I've been around long enough to recognize what that kind of paperwork means. Memory issues, decline, things that lead to supervised living. Sunnybrook. I stared at the phone a little longer. Then I said something that surprised even me. That doesn't look right. Emma nodded quickly. Too quickly. That's what I thought. She scrolled down to another picture. Another page from the same set of documents. This one had a date printed near the corner. 3 weeks before I moved into Sunnybrook. And a doctor's signature. The thing is, I didn't recognize the doctor's name. Not even a little. I leaned back in the chair. The heater vent above the hallway door clicked and pushed warm air into the room. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Emma said something else. Quiet again. Grandpa, did you ever go to a memory doctor? Memory doctor. That's what kids call neurologists sometimes. I thought about it. Ran back through the last few months in my head. Regular checkup. Blood pressure appointment. One visit about my shoulder after I slipped on ice outside the garage. But memory testing? No. Unless, hold on. There had been one afternoon Carol drove me to a clinic across town. Said it was routine follow-up. I remember filling out forms. Waiting room with a fish tank. A nurse asking some questions about sleep. But no tests. No puzzles. No word lists. Nothing like the evaluations I'd heard about. So I told Emma that. She frowned. Because this says you did. She pointed at the photo again. Right there in the middle of the page was a checklist. Orientation questions completed. Cognitive exam administered. Patient demonstrates impairment. Those words. Printed neat. Official looking. And suddenly the puzzle pieces started rubbing against each other in my head. Not fitting. Just grinding. Now here's where I need to slow down a second. Because when you first see something like that, something that suggests a whole story you weren't part of, your brain tries to protect you a little. It looks for simple explanations. Clerical error. Wrong patient file. Maybe even the wrong Mickle Lawson. Stranger things happen. So that's what I said. Could be a mix-up. Emma shook her head. Again. Firm. No, Grandpa. She zoomed into the corner of the document. There was another name there. Guardian authorization. Signed by Carol Lawson. My wife. The air in that lounge suddenly felt warmer. Not uncomfortable exactly. Just heavy. And the strange part was, I still didn't jump straight to anger. Not yet. Because 40 years of marriage doesn't flip upside down from one photograph. Even a bad one. You start by asking quieter questions. Questions like, was there an appointment I forgot? Did someone misunderstand something? Did Carol sign papers thinking it was routine? Possible. All possible. But Emma leaned even closer then. Voice barely a breath. There's more. She opened another photo. This one showed a prescription sheet. 2 medications listed. One of them I recognized. Blood pressure. The other one, I didn't. Long name. Something ending in "done." Sedative class. Used for agitation. That's when Emma whispered the sentence that really changed things. Grandpa. I looked it up. Pause. Then she said it. They give this to patients who can't live alone. And suddenly the little question in my mind wasn't little anymore. Because every night at Sunnybrook, I had been taking 2 small white tablets. Without asking what they were. Without checking. Trusting. And now a 13-year-old girl sitting beside me in a lounge chair was showing me photographs that suggested those pills, and the paperwork behind them might not belong to my life at all. So the question sitting in front of me became pretty simple. Do I trust the story I've been living inside? Or do I start verifying it? Quietly. Carefully. Before someone realizes I'm asking. That night I didn't take the pills. Not both of them anyway. Dinner had been meatloaf and mashed potatoes. The dining room smelled like brown gravy and disinfectant wipes. Same routine as every evening. Plates cleared. Residents drifting back to the lounge. Around 8:30 the medication cart came down the hall. Small metal drawers. Plastic cups stacked on top. The wheel squeaked a little when it turned corners. Carla, the nurse with the pen behind her ear, stopped outside my room and knocked twice on the doorframe. Mickle meds. Normal voice. Nothing suspicious. She handed me the cup with 2 white tablets and a paper cup of water. I took them like I always did. Routine. Then I waited until she rolled the cart to the next room. Closed my door. Sat on the bed. The hallway light came through the crack under the door and stretched across the carpet like a stripe. I held the pills in my palm. 1 small round tablet. 1 slightly longer oval. Blood pressure I recognized. The other one, the long one. That was the mystery. I stood up and walked to the sink. Turned on the faucet, so the pipes made noise. Then I swallowed the blood pressure pill. Let the other one drop quietly into the trash can under the counter. Just like that. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, because people do when they hear something like this. I wasn't trying to stage some dramatic rebellion. I just wanted to see what happened. One night. No sedative. That's all. But I remember standing there after and thinking, wait a second. Had I felt different these past weeks? Emma's question earlier had stuck with me. Do you feel different lately? At the time I said no. And that was mostly true. Mostly. But thinking back, afternoons had been foggier than usual. I chalked it up to boredom or bad coffee. Hard to say. Memory gets slippery once you start examining it too closely. Anyway, that night I slept lighter. Woke up once around 2 in the morning because someone down the hall was snoring loud enough to rattle the vent. But I didn't feel groggy. Morning came. Sunlight across the parking lot outside my window. And here's the thing. Usually after breakfast I felt slow. Like my thoughts were wading through syrup. That morning they weren't. Clear. Sharp enough that I noticed details I'd ignored before. Like the medication cart. It rolled through the hallway every evening, with little labels stuck to the drawers. Names and room numbers. I'd never paid attention to them. Why would I? But now I did. That afternoon Emma visited again. Same routine. Backpack. Chair by the window. But this time when she sat down I said something first. I skipped one of the pills last night. Her eyes widened a little. Did anything happen? I thought about that. Nope. Then I corrected myself. Well, actually something did happen. She leaned forward. What? I felt normal. Which sounds like a strange thing to say out loud. But it was the best description I had. Emma nodded slowly, like she had expected that answer. Then she pulled out her phone again. More photos. She had gone deeper into that purse apparently. This time the image showed a letter. Printed. Official looking. Facility recommendation document. Sunnybrook Sr., living listed near the top. Referral authorization. And right under that was the name of the doctor again. The same one I didn't recognize. Emma pointed at a line halfway down the page. Read that part. I squinted at the screen. Small print. But I could make it out. Patient requires supervised environment due to progressive cognitive instability. Progressive. That word hit me funny. Because progressive means ongoing. Getting worse. And in the weeks before coming here, I hadn't felt worse. I rebuilt a carburetor. Drove across town. Balanced the checkbook at the kitchen table. Normal life. Or at least normal for a man pushing 70. Which, hold on. I said 70 just now. That's not quite right. I was 68 then. My 70th was still 2 years away. Funny how your brain rounds numbers up sometimes. Anyway, I leaned back in the chair. The sunlight through the window had shifted lower across the carpet. Emma watched my face carefully. Kids do that when they're waiting for an adult to catch up to something. Finally, I said it. Your mom signed these. Emma nodded again. Yeah, there wasn't any anger in her voice. Just certainty, which made the room feel heavier than if she'd been yelling. Because certainty means she had already thought this through. And that's when another piece slid into place. Carol, my wife, Emma's mother. She had always handled the paperwork in our house. Insurance forms. Doctor scheduling. Bank statements. I trusted her with those things. Didn't question it. 40 years builds habits like that. But sitting there looking at those photographs, something occurred to me that hadn't crossed my mind before. If someone wanted to move a person quietly into supervised care, paperwork would be the easiest way. Signatures, evaluations, recommendations. Most people would never question them, especially if they believed the person handing them over loved them. The thought made the back of my neck feel cold. Emma must have noticed. She leaned closer again and whispered the sentence she'd been holding on to since the day before. Grandpa, I think Mom needed you out of the house. Needed. That word. Not wanted. Needed. I stared out the window at the parking lot. A white sedan pulled into one of the visitor spaces. Engine ticking as it cooled. My brain started turning over possibilities. Slow at first, then faster. Was there money involved? Property? Something in the house I didn't know about? Because the truth is, Carol and I owned that house outright. Mortgage paid years ago. Land value had gone up lately, too. Developers sniffing around our neighborhood. Offers in the mail sometimes. I hadn't paid them much attention. Carol handled most of that. But Emma's voice pulled me back into the room. There's one more thing. She opened the last photo. This one was a prescription authorization, doctor's order, medication adjustment, and next to the sedative name was a handwritten note. Dosage increase recommended for patient management. Patient management. That phrase sat there on the screen. Cold. Clinical. Like I wasn't a person anymore. Just a situation to control. Emma looked up at me. Waiting. And for the first time since this whole thing started, the question in my mind stopped being quiet. Because if those documents were real, and the signatures certainly looked real, then someone had built a whole medical story about me. Without my participation. Without my knowledge. Which meant the next step was unavoidable. I needed to find out whether the doctor listed on those papers actually existed, and whether he had ever examined me at all. Because if he hadn't, then the quiet little room at Sunnybrook suddenly wasn't a recovery stop anymore. It was something else entirely. That night I didn't rush anything. No dramatic confrontations. No late-night phone calls. Just quiet thinking. The kind that happens when a room goes still and your brain starts laying pieces out across the table one by one. I sat in the chair near the window in my room. Parking lot lights flickering on outside. Orange glow on the asphalt. People assume when you suspect something big, betrayal, deception, whatever word you want to use, that anger hits first. But it didn't. Not for me. What I felt was careful. Like when you hear a strange sound in your garage at night, and you don't run out swinging a wrench. You listen first. Because if you're wrong, you look foolish. And if you're right, you want to know exactly what you're walking into. So that evening when the medication cart came again, I repeated the same routine. Blood pressure pill down. Sedative into the trash. Quiet. Now here's something I haven't mentioned yet. Sunnybrook had a small computer room near the library. 2 desktops. Old machines. Residents used them to email family or read the news. Most evenings the room sat empty. People preferred television. Or naps. The next morning after breakfast, I walked down there, sat at the computer, and typed the doctor's name from Emma's photograph into the search bar. Dr. Harold Benton, neurological evaluation specialist. Or at least, that's what the paperwork claimed. The internet took a second to load, slow connection. Then the results appeared. Medical directories, hospital listings, clinic profiles. I scrolled, then scrolled again. Nothing. No neurologist named Harold Benton in our county. None in the neighboring county either. I even checked the state licensing board website, physician registry. Typed the name carefully. Still nothing. Now maybe you're thinking, maybe I typed it wrong. That thought crossed my mind too. So I tried a few variations. H. Benton, Harold J. Benton, Dr. Benton Neurology. Same result. No records. Which meant one of two things. Either the man had retired decades ago and disappeared from every medical directory, or he had never existed in the first place. I sat there staring at that blank search screen longer than I should have. The computer fan humming. Dust smell in the room. And I remember thinking something strange. Not Carol betrayed me. Not yet. What I thought was, this is organized. Because forged paperwork isn't something you throw together in an afternoon. Someone had built a full narrative. Medical diagnosis, care recommendation, medication schedule, facility referral, all the official pieces. Clean, professional, believable. And suddenly Emma's earlier sentence echoed again. Mom needed you out of the house. Needed. Why? I walked back to my room after that. Slow. Thinking. And somewhere along that walk another memory surfaced. A conversation Carol had on the phone about a month before I moved here. She was in the kitchen, talking quietly. I remember hearing the word inspection. And something about an offer timeline. At the time, I assumed it was one of those developer letters again. People calling about buying houses in our neighborhood. Developers had been circling for years. Most of us ignored them, but Carol had started answering those calls lately. Said she was just curious. Curious. Funny word. I sat down on the bed, stared at the carpet, and for a second I wondered if I was stretching things too far. Because suspicion can run away from you if you feed it. Maybe the doctor was real, but hard to find online. Maybe the medication adjustment was legitimate. Maybe Carol had honestly believed I needed care. Possible. All possible. But then another thought settled in. Quiet. Solid. If everything was legitimate, there would be records. Appointments. Clinic visits. Insurance claims. Evidence. Which meant verifying it wouldn't harm anyone. Truth doesn't fear questions. So that became the plan. Simple. Step 1. Stop taking the sedative. Step 2. Gather information quietly. Step 3. Confirm whether those documents had any real medical origin. No confrontation yet. Not until I understood the shape of the situation. Emma came that afternoon again. Same chair by the window. Same backpack. I told her what I found about the doctor. Her reaction wasn't surprise. It was relief. Like a math problem, finally producing the answer she expected. I knew it, she said. Kids sometimes jump to certainty faster than adults. But this time she might have been right. I asked her something then. Something that had been sitting in my chest all morning. Emma, why did you start looking through your mom's purse in the first place? She hesitated, looked at the floor, then said something I hadn't anticipated. Because she sold the house. That sentence landed heavier than any paperwork. Sold it. Emma nodded. Last week. Now I need to correct something I almost said just now. I was about to claim she told me immediately when the sale happened, but that's not accurate. She had only overheard a conversation between her mom and someone on the phone. A realtor. Contracts. Closing dates. Emma said the house inspection had already happened. Buyers lined up, which meant something important. Carol didn't just move me into Sunnybrook. She cleared the house. Legally. Quietly. Before I even realized anything had changed. I leaned back in the chair. The sunlight through the window had shifted again. Parking lot half shadow now. Emma watched me. Waiting. Probably wondering if I was going to get angry. Yell. Demand explanations. But that's not how I operate. Anger burns energy. And I needed energy for the next part. Because the situation had shifted from confusion to something else. Planning. If the house was already under contract. If the medical paperwork might be fabricated. Then staying passive inside Sunnybrook meant one thing. I was exactly where someone wanted me. Contained. Managed. And the only person who had noticed something wrong was a 13-year-old girl with a phone camera. I looked at her then. Really looked. She was still a kid. Shoes tapping lightly against the chair leg. Hair half falling out of the ponytail. But there was determination sitting behind her eyes. Real determination. So I asked her a question. Calm. Straight. Emma, are you sure you want to get involved in this? Because once you step into something like that, you don't get to pretend you didn't see it anymore. She didn't hesitate. Not even a second. I already am. And sitting there in that quiet lounge chair, I realized the next move belonged to us. Not to the paperwork. Not to the people who signed it. But to two people who had finally started asking questions. Now here's where I'll ask you something. If you suspected someone close to you had quietly rearranged your life for their own reasons, would you confront them immediately? Or would you gather proof first? Slow. Careful. Before anyone realizes the story is starting to unravel. The next 3 days moved faster than the 3 weeks before them. Once you decide to verify something, your brain stops wandering and starts working. First step was simple. Documentation. Emma brought a small notebook the following afternoon. Spiral-bound. Purple cover. Probably something from a school supply aisle. She slid it across the table between us. Write everything you remember, she said. Not dramatic. Just practical. So I started listing things. Doctor visits I actually attended. Medications I had taken before Sunnybrook. Dates I remembered clearly. And I left blank spaces where my memory wasn't solid. Because pretending certainty helps nobody. At one point I wrote down the clinic visit Carol had driven me to. The one with the fish tank in the waiting room. For a second I thought it was in early January, but then I remembered the sidewalks were dry that day. So it must have been later in the month, after the snow melted. Details like that matter. Emma copied the names from the photographs she had taken. Doctor, prescription, referral office, everything. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She called the clinic. Right there in the lounge. Used the speaker, but kept the volume low. A receptionist answered. Emma told her she was checking on appointment records for her grandfather. There was a pause. Keyboard clicking. Then the receptionist said something that made both of us freeze. There are no neurological evaluations listed under that name. Emma thanked her politely and hung up. Just like that. One piece confirmed. Now here's where things could have turned messy. Because once you realize someone might have built a fake medical trail around you, the temptation is to blow the whole thing open immediately. Call lawyers. Call police. Storm into offices. But that would have warned Carol. And if she was already selling the house, time mattered. So instead we moved to the next step. Evidence. Emma asked if Sunnybrook had cameras. I hadn't noticed before. But once she mentioned it, I remembered seeing small black domes on the hallway ceilings. Security cameras. Standard in places like this. Which meant there would be records of medication distribution, cart rounds, maybe even intake paperwork from the day I arrived. So the next morning I walked down to the administrative office. Come. Knocked on the door. The director, a man named Douglas, tall fellow with glasses, invited me in. I told him something simple. I'd like a copy of my medical intake file. No accusations, just a request. He didn't hesitate. Printed the documents right there. Stapled packet. And here's the strange part. While he was handing it over, he said something casually that caught my attention. Your wife was very thorough with the paperwork. Thorough. That word again. I thanked him. Walked back to my room. Closed the door. Then I read every page. Slow. Line by line. And sure enough, there it was. The same evaluation forms Emma had photographed. Same doctor's name. Same diagnosis. Same medication recommendation. But now something else stood out. The signature under the physician approval line looked printed, not written. Flat ink. I held the page closer to the lamp. No pressure marks. No pen strokes. Just a copied signature. Now I'm not a forensic expert. Not even close. But anyone who's signed checks for 40 years knows what real ink looks like on paper. This wasn't it. I leaned back in the chair. Heart beating a little faster now. Not panic. Just awareness. Because the situation had crossed a line. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was construction. And that realization carried a strange weight. Because Carol, my wife, wasn't reckless. She didn't do sloppy things. Which meant if she built this, she believed it would hold. That thought sat there for a while. Then Emma arrived that afternoon. I showed her the copied signature. She studied it for a minute, then said something that pushed the whole thing forward. We should go to the closing. Closing. The house sale. She explained that her mom had mentioned the date while talking to the realtor. Friday morning. 2 days away. Now here's the moment I hesitated. Because stepping into that office, showing up unexpectedly, would force the truth into daylight. No more quiet verifying. No more observation. Just confrontation. And I'll be honest with you. I wondered for a minute if we were pushing too far. Emma was 13. I was sitting in a facility officially listed as cognitively impaired. Walking into a property closing could look unstable. People might assume exactly what the paperwork claimed. That I wasn't thinking clearly. I said that out loud. Emma listened, then shrugged a little. If you don't show up, they'll sell your house anyway. Simple logic. Hard to argue. So the plan formed right there. Friday morning. Emma would skip the first half of school. Her friend's older brother, licensed driver, would give us a ride. We'd go to the closing office. And I would ask one question. Just one. Who authorized the sale of my home? No speeches. No accusations. Just that. And the answers would either confirm everything or expose it. The night before Friday, I sat on the bed in room 214 and stared out at the parking lot lights, wondering if I had misjudged something. If this whole path might end with people shaking their heads and saying, see, this is why he needs supervision. That possibility sat there. Real. But then I remembered Emma, sitting beside me, with that purple notebook, and the photographs she had risked taking, and the quiet certainty in her voice when she said she was getting me out. So I decided something. Even if the confrontation went sideways, even if people doubted me, truth deserved daylight, doesn't it? Or would you have stayed quiet and let the story written about you remain the official one? Friday morning started colder than the rest of the week. Thin frost on the Sunnybrook parking lot. I remember stepping outside the front doors and feeling the air cut through my jacket sleeves. Not unbearable, just sharp enough to wake you up. Emma was already waiting near the curb. Her friend's brother, kid named Tyler. Wait, Trevor. Yeah, Trevor. Tall high school senior with messy hair and a pickup that sounded like it had a loose muffler. He didn't ask questions. Kids that age sometimes know when not to. We drove about 15 minutes across town to a small office building near the courthouse square. 2-story brick place. Real estate offices, insurance brokers, that sort of thing. Closing offices always look the same. Neutral furniture. Coffee pot in the corner. Paper everywhere. We walked in around 10. A receptionist sat behind the front desk, tapping at a keyboard. She looked up when the door opened. "Can I help you?" Her eyes landed on Emma first, then me, probably trying to figure out what combination of grandfather and granddaughter business had brought us there. I said the name of the realty company Carol had been talking about. She checked the computer. Yes, the Lawson property closing is in conference room B. Lawson property. Hearing it called that instead of our house felt strange. She pointed down the hallway. We walked. Carpet muffled our steps. Conference room B had a glass panel in the door. I could see people sitting around a table inside. Paper spread out. Carol was there. My wife. She sat near the end of the table, with a pen in her hand. A man in a suit across from her, probably the buyer's agent. Another woman beside him flipping through documents. For a second I almost turned around. Not because I was afraid exactly. More because 40 years of shared life makes confrontation feel unnatural. Your brain wants to smooth things over even when something isn't right. But Emma touched my sleeve. Just a small tap. Enough. So I opened the door. The room went quiet. Carol looked up first. Her face didn't change right away. Recognition came slowly, like her mind was adjusting the scene. Then she stood. "Mickle, what are you doing here?" Not angry. Not warm either. Just surprised. I stepped inside the room. Emma stayed near the door. The buyers, a middle-aged couple I didn't recognize, looked back and forth between us like they'd wandered into the wrong meeting. I placed my hand on the table. Steady. Then I asked the question. Exactly the one I'd planned. Who authorized the sale of my home? No raised voice. No speech. Just that. The realtor blinked. Looked at Carol. Carol's jaw tightened slightly. "Sweetheart," she said carefully. "We talked about this." Now here's the odd part. For a split second my brain tried to agree with her. Because when someone says, "We talked about this," your memory automatically checks itself. Did we? Did I forget? That's the power of authority in a room. But Emma spoke from the doorway before the doubt could grow. He didn't sign anything. The room shifted. The buyer's agent cleared his throat. "Ma'am, is there a problem with the ownership documentation?" Carol looked at him quickly. "No. Everything is in order." Then she turned back to me. "You're not supposed to be out of the facility right now." Facility. That word. Like I was a misplaced package. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the stapled intake papers from Sunnybrook, the ones with the printed signature. I placed them on the table, next to the sale documents. "I've been reading these," I said. Carol didn't touch them, didn't even glance down. But the realtor did. He leaned forward, looked at the physician approval line. His eyebrows pulled together slightly. "Is this a copied signature?" That question hung in the room like a draft. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then the buyer, the man across the table, said something quietly to his wife. They both leaned back in their chairs. Paper rustled. Carol finally looked down at the documents, then at me. And in that moment I saw something I hadn't seen in 40 years of marriage. Calculation. Not guilt. Not panic. Just calculation. She said, "Mickle, you're confused. These evaluations were necessary." I shook my head. "Slow. I called the clinic." The realtor looked up. What clinic? The one where this doctor supposedly works. I tapped the name on the page. No such neurologist. The room went still again, and that's when the buyer's agent pushed his chair back slightly. Perhaps we should pause this closing until ownership verification is clarified. Professional language, but the meaning was obvious. Everything had stopped. Carol looked around the room, first at the agents, then at me, then at Emma. For a second I thought she might argue, deny everything, but she didn't. She just sat back in the chair and folded her hands. Quiet. The closing never happened that day. The buyers left first, then the realtor. Eventually, it was just the three of us in the room. Carol didn't yell, didn't apologize either. She just stared at the table, and after a long minute, she said something strange. I thought it would be easier this way. Easier. That word. I asked her what she meant, but she didn't answer. Not really. Just repeated that the house was too much responsibility now. That Sunnybrook would take care of me. That selling the property would simplify things. Simplify. Another tidy word. Emma and I left the office after that. Cold air outside again. Trevor's truck still parked along the curb. As we walked toward it, Emma asked something quietly. Are you going back to Sunnybrook? I stopped on the sidewalk. Thought about that. The truth is, legally I still had a room there, and sorting out everything with the house and the paperwork would take time. So yeah, for a little while longer I did go back. But things were different now. Very different. Because the story written about me had cracked open. People had seen the questions. And once questions start moving through official offices, they rarely stop. Now here's something I still wonder sometimes. If Emma hadn't looked inside that purse, if she hadn't taken those photographs, would I still be sitting in room 214, right now, believing the paperwork written about me? Hard question, because sometimes the biggest turning points in life arrive from the smallest acts of curiosity. Things didn't untangle overnight after that. Real life almost never wraps up that neatly. The closing was halted, sure. Papers pulled back. Buyers told there were ownership complications. That's the polite language people use when something smells off, but nobody wants to say fraud out loud yet. But paperwork has its own speed. Slow. Lawyers got involved about a week later. First mine, a local guy who had handled our property taxes years back. Name's Franklin. Thin fellow with reading glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He sat with me in a small office that smelled like old folders and copier toner while I explained everything. Or tried to. Sometimes when you tell a story out loud, it sounds messier than it did in your head. I remember starting to say the clinic visit had happened on a Monday. Then halfway through I stopped and corrected myself because the fish tank I remembered had blue gravel, and I'd only seen that once before at a dentist office on a Friday afternoon. Memory is funny that way. Details rearrange themselves while you're talking. Franklin didn't seem bothered. He just kept writing. By the time he finished reviewing the Sunnybrook intake forms and the copied signature, he leaned back in his chair and said one short sentence. This won't hold. Meaning the paperwork. Meaning the story built around me. After that, things started shifting. Sunnybrook administrators requested clarification from Carol about the medical referral. Once lawyers get involved, facilities suddenly become very careful about where their documentation came from. Turns out the clinic address listed on my evaluation forms belonged to a building that had closed 2 years earlier. Empty office space. Which explained why nobody had heard of Dr. Harold Benton. There never was one. The medication part took longer to sort out. Apparently the sedative prescription had been filled through a private pharmacy account tied to Carol's insurance plan. Legal gray area there. Complicated. But once the intake file was questioned, Sunnybrook stopped administering it immediately. Funny thing, within about 3 days the fog that I'd been blaming on boredom lifted completely. My afternoons got sharper. I started noticing birds again outside the parking lot trees. Sounds I'd been tuning out. Little things. And eventually, about a month after the closing incident, the facility director called me into his office. Same man with the glasses. Douglas. He cleared his throat and said something careful. Mr. Lawson, based on the updated evaluation from your primary physician, there appears to be no medical requirement for assisted living placement. Careful words. But the meaning was plain. I was free to leave. Now here's the part some people expect to turn triumphant. Grand return home. Victory speech. Doors swinging open. But real life didn't play it that way. Because by then the house situation was tangled. The attempted sale had triggered legal review of the ownership transfer paperwork Carol had prepared. Turns out she had tried to file a guardianship request along with the property sale authorization. That's the piece that finally caught the court's attention. Guardianship requires proof. Medical proof. And once the doctor listed on those forms turned out to be fictional, the whole structure collapsed. Carol didn't go to jail or anything dramatic like that. At least, not while I was still involved in the case. The court dismissed the guardianship request and froze any attempt to transfer property ownership without my signature present. After that, things got quiet. Carol moved out of the house a few months later. We didn't have some big screaming divorce. No courtroom shouting. Just a series of legal conversations that ended a 40-year marriage with the few stamped documents. Life sometimes ends chapters in whispers instead of explosions. Emma stayed close, though. She visited the house the first weekend I moved back in. Garage still smelled like motor oil. Same old carburetor parts sitting on the workbench, where I'd left them before all this started. She walked through the living room slowly, looked around like she was checking if the place remembered us. Then she smiled. Kids bounce back quicker than adults. We sat on the porch that afternoon drinking lemonade from mismatched glasses. The wind pushed dry leaves along the driveway. Emma asked me something then. "Grandpa, are you mad at Mom?" I thought about that for a long minute. Long enough that the lemonade ice melted a little. Truth is, anger had already burned itself out by then. What was left felt more like distance. Like looking at a town you used to live in through the rear window of a car. Familiar, but far away. So I told her the most honest thing I could. "I'm more grateful you were paying attention. Because that's really the part that matters. People assume loyalty always comes from the places we expect. Spouses, contracts, paper promises. But sometimes loyalty shows up in quieter forms. Like a 13-year-old girl noticing something odd inside her mother's purse, taking a photograph, and deciding that didn't sit right. I still think about that sometimes when I'm sitting on the porch in the evenings. Sun going down behind the trees. Truck parked in the driveway where it always belonged. One small decision. One moment of curiosity. That's all it took to unravel a story that could have trapped me for the rest of my life. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many people out there are living inside paperwork written by someone else? And if a person close to you suddenly started making decisions about your life, quiet ones, wrapped in official language, would you question it? Or would you trust the signatures on the page? So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Uncle Mickle's voice travels. Always make sure the story written about your life is one you actually agreed to.